Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hey everyone, and welcome to All Together, the Family Science Insights podcast, produced by Ellen Massell of the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element, with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Dina Sargent. Let's get started.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today we are diving into the role of the grandparent. How valuable are they to the family? And how can you navigate family tensions involving them? Answering these questions and more today is our expert, Dr. Freiberg, who has published under J.W. Freiberg, but today we're going to call you Terry, if that's okay.
Everyone calls me that.
Excellent. So Terry studies chronic loneliness through the lens of a social psychologist turned lawyer. He is the author of Surrounded by Others and Yet So Alone, a lawyer's case stories of love, loneliness, and litigation, which explores chronic loneliness through case stories mined from his 3 decades as an attorney. Dr. Freiberg is also the author of 4 Seasons of Loneliness and the editor of Growing Up Lonely, papers collected from the 2018 Symposium on Childhood Loneliness at the Kennedy Center in Boston. He is a member of the Massachusetts State Bar and the Bar of the Supreme Court of the United States. So, with this wealth of knowledge and incredible career, I'm excited to interview Terry today. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So to get us started, I just have an introductory question about you. What compelled you to pursue both social psychology, and law?
Oh, pure chance. I was a social psychologist, a professor at Boston University. And after a decade of that, I had a chance to go to Harvard Law School. I certainly wasn't going to turn that down. And I hoped, and by luck, succeeded in putting the two careers together. So I was the lawyer in Boston whose clients were all the psychiatrists, psychologists, and clinical social workers of the city of Boston.
Wow, that's really cool. I love it when I hear about people who have done multiple things and they've managed to combine them and have a really interesting career or interesting, multifaceted life where they get to pursue multiple things. It's very inspiring to me as well. So we're going to move now to a Have You Met section where we're going to do some sort of icebreaker questions to get to know Terry. So firstly, do you have a favorite book?
Oh, I do. I have a book called Affective Neuroscience.
Wow.
I'll leave my literature favorite aside. I adore magical realism from Latin America, that whole genre of literature. But in the sciences, affective neuroscience. So it's a study by a professor named Jake Pansep, who's no longer with us, about how the biochemistry inside of us makes us the kind of beings that needs to have friendship and love if we're not going to get sick and die young.
Wow. That is fascinating. I love hearing about those kind of how the brain works. And secondly, do you have a favorite movie?
A favorite movie. Let's see. That would be Shawshank Redemption. I think it's a wonderful film because it explains the importance of hope in life and how even if you're in a prison for life, as those guys were, the role of hope that Andy's character had was so important for Morgan Freeman to learn to keep hoping. And eventually he got out and remember rejoined Andy on the beach in what looked like heaven.
Yeah. Wow, so inspiring. And do you have a favorite podcast? Do you happen to listen to many podcasts?
I do. My favorite at the moment is a young man named Aaron Goodwin who tries to run through the incredibly complex political happenings here in my country. And he and his crew do a good job of keeping track of what's going on.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I wasn't sure if you were listening to podcasts or just busy being on them all the time. I know you've done plenty in the past, so hopefully people can check out those as well. And next up, do you have a role model? This could be a personal life, role model or somebody professionally.
Um, yeah, Mario Savio, and then Hail Adore. Mario Savio. I went to Berkeley, the University of California at Berkeley in the 1960s. And that was the first time I ever saw he was this leader of the student movement. And that really launched the worldwide student movement. It's the first time I ever saw anyone stand up for the rights of man. And they were just standing up for the rights to pass out leaflets at the gates to the university, sort of an 18th century right that had been challenged by the president of the university. So I was greatly admiring of someone who dared stand up and say, hang on a moment. I was very impressed with that.
Yeah, very important. And is there a class or a course that you've taken or maybe that you've taught that has inspired you?
Well, certainly, let's stick with one that I've taken.
Mm,
At the university at Berkeley, we took a course called Introduction to Music for Classical Music for Non-Majors, and it's made classical music, and it was an equivalent one in art, in the history of art. And it's amazing how even one semester study, or someone could do it on their own, can set you up to appreciate the beauty that artists and musicians have composed and painted and sculpted for us to enjoy. So
yeah, absolutely. Incredible. And is there, out of all the things that you've mentioned so far, is there an important lesson that you've learnt?
oh, absolutely. And the important lesson is humility when it comes to expertise. You know, when you learn something in your own sphere, and most of us have some sphere of things we're good at, it's important to learn to listen to the expertise of others in spheres that we don't know anything about.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really important. So, with this introduction out of our way, we're going to dive into our topic for today as to why grandparents are so valuable to a family. And we're going to start out with some definitions. So, how would you define family?
Well, family to me is a biological definition. It's
Hmm.
very simple. I mean, animals have families. We are social mammals. I think my study of the history of evolution leads me to nothing so much as it does that we have to understand that we humans are social mammals. There are many other social mammals, wolves, many others, and their family are people who you are related to by blood.
Okay. And on that, how would you define grandparenthood?
Well, grandparenthood is, I would go with the definition that any good, sensible 5-year-old would use, which is
Hmm.
the grandparents are the mommy and daddy of your mommy and daddy. I think it's
Yeah.
that simple. I've done a lot of legal work to do with adoption, so I know there's another sphere of parenthood and grandparenthood, but they're quite distinct.
Right. Okay. So, we're going with sort of the blood relation for this definition. That totally makes sense. So, how would you describe the relationship between the grandparents and the rest of the family?
Um, I think what's really important about grandparents, remember in high school they taught us it takes 2 points to define a line. So if you have 2
Hmm.
points and you draw a line between them, you've defined that line. I think it takes 2 generations of family to define a lineage, and
Oh,
lineage is the roots, and people who are rootless, who've lost the roots back to their family, are very psychologically stressed by that. I've seen it, for example, in adoption searches. Like, I'm thinking of one case of a woman who was adopted as happily as possible. They adored her and her adopted siblings. They took perfect care of them. She loved them, no problem whatsoever. But as soon as she heard of 23andMe, she opened an adoption search to see if what she could find about her biological family.
mm, absolutely. I've seen so many of those shows where people are searching for their families, and it's really, really interesting to hear their stories and hear how some of them are so fulfilled by their adopted family, for example, but they're still so curious, and there's certainly something to that, I think. So, from a psychological standpoint, then, since you have obviously pursued that, in what ways do you think grandparents affect a child's emotional development and their sense of security?
Oh, I think in very profound ways. There are a lot of studies and that I've read and prepared. I won't read them off here. I'll put them on my website. That
Mhm.
really take a look. The emotional security comes in uh, for many reasons. There's emotional stability, for example. There's secure attachment. There's identity formation. There's self-esteem. There's resilience. All of those important qualities are instilled in part by grandparents. When a bank loans you money to buy a house, they take the deed to the house as security. It's called a mortgage. It's fine that they trust you that you'll pay the loan back on a monthly basis, but they want some security behind that. That's why they take a mortgage on your house. If you don't pay your loan, they'll take your house, sell it, and pay themselves back. That's what grandparents provide for children psychologically, security behind the adult parents, because our children, unlike any other animal on earth, we have the longest childhood of any animal by far. I mean, it takes 4 years to learn to walk, or 2 years to learn to walk, let's say, 4 years to talk, 20 years to begin to build out your cortical brain, your human adult brain. No other animal has to wait so long. So children are dependent on human children are dependent on their parents for years and years and years and years. And they're very insecure about losing or leaving their parents, as they should be, because they would perish. And a lot is built into their neuropsychology, into the chemistry in them to keep them close to their parents because they're so dependent. Grandparents psychologically are backup, just like that mortgage on your house is backup to the bank. So, whether you want to talk about the security of their attachment, their emotional stability, their identity formation, think of the power of parents and grandparents to instill culture patterns in their children. I mean, you get Muslims praying 5 times a day, Jews wearing Orthodox Jews wearing black hats and black robes on hot summer days in cultures where that isn't the norm at all. Um, Parents have an enormous capacity to influence their children in culture patterns, especially if they can point to their parents having done the same thing. Then they're able to say to their children, we have always done that, so you must do it too. So
Mm,
it's very difficult to underestimate the importance of grandparents in influencing grandchildren.
absolutely. I think it's really important to be able to say, look, like this is what our family does and point to the older generations. And
Mhm.
yeah, I love the impact of traditions as well. I think it's really, really special to be able to carry that on for sure.
And that relates to the answer I gave to the first question, to roots. Roots aren't just
Yes.
about this is my biological lineage. It's also about what my family has done. We do it
Yes.
like this.
Mm,
And the world over, everybody's as different as could be, but everybody's attached to their culture patterns, their way of doing music, their way of doing dance, their way of doing theater, their way of doing philosophy. That's one of the wonders and the richness of the world. It's like flowers in a garden. A garden,
mm.
if you put just one type of flower in a garden, it's not really a garden. It's just a growing spot for daisies or whatever. Many flowers make a garden, and many culture patterns make the richness of human culture.
Absolutely. So, kind of a similar question, but how do you think the role of the grandparent is different to that of the parent?
Well, the parent is responsible for sort of the biological process of raising the child, getting enough food
Mm,
in them, getting them to sleep, getting them to do their homework, and so on. The grandparent is more about training them in the traditions, as we spoke about, but also to participate with the parents in training children how to love, how to befriend others. Why is that so important? Think of this. Humans, we developed from the great apes. Great apes are strong. They're covered with fur that keeps them warm. They have we have eye teeth. They have fangs. They have strong arms and hands. They can climb into trees, some of them, and so on. We have none of that. Humans gave up all those protective things in order to create the bigger and brain, the bigger cranium full of this enormous brain that we have. We gave all that up. So our culture is all about our sociality, we call it. All that humans have is the ability to cooperate, communicate, and work together. Think about how long we hold a child, both parents and grandparents, even in today's world where things are so safe. We have car seats, we have everything in the world to keep children safe. Agriculture only started 12,000 years ago. Before that, we were all hunter gatherers. Imagine how dangerous the world was, right? Everything was sharp. There were predators out there. Little children were prey to predators. Parents had to work even harder to keep children safe. They did that by cooperating. And the only way you could cooperate and make a living in a hunter gatherer society is by grandparents taking care of grandchildren while the parents were able to work to do all the tasks that were needed, gather food, and so on. So we know from burial sites that paleoarchaeologists find that older people were respected when they were buried in many of the cultures. We see this in the Neanderthal, for example. That's the closest type of hominin, of other type of person, what we call
Mm.
humans, that we have. They died out about 45,000 years ago. But their burial sites that we find, that anthropologists dig up, show older people in ceremonial positions with things buried with them, obviously to honor them. So they were honoring their elders who would have been their grandparents because those people were important in keeping society safe for everybody, keeping those children safe for the next generation so that the parents could go hunting and gathering and do what was needed.
Absolutely. So we've sort of been through the values of the grandparents, why they're important, what they pass on to the grandchildren. What about some issues? What are some common tensions that arise between grandparents and parents, and how would you recommend families sort of navigating those?
Well, there are issues that arise,
Mm,
obviously, and let's talk about two different kinds of grandparents. We're
sure.
in a world today where most grandparents are not in three generation homes. That's brand new. That only really started to statistically become prevalent at world after World War II. Prior to
Mm,
that, families lived in multiple generations because it was obvious that grandparents were the perfect people to take care of grandchildren, as they have done for 5 million years of human existence. But after World War II, we started to separate grandparents from from their children and therefore from their grandchildren. So grandparents who still live with their children, about 18% in the United States, about 20% in Australia. I looked that up for this podcast. um, that they have a very different role to play in this thing. But grandparents who visit, who don't live with their grandchildren, have still have the important role of grandparent to play, but have to strategically sort of think it through. And they can get in trouble, obviously, with the children when they come visiting and suddenly they change the rules. They give the
mm,
children sweets when the parents wouldn't have done it. They allow more uh, screen time than the parents were busy not doing, trying to keep the kids away from the screen. So it's tough for modern grandparents who don't live with their children to fit in during a visit because they want to do so much for their grandchildren, and yet they must restrain themselves from breaking the parental rules that are in place.
absolutely. It's so interesting. So what do you think are some healthy ways for grandparents to, offer that support and help out in the family without overstepping or creating tension with the parents if they do have those rules?
I think it's just important that grandparents understand that they're not calling the shots on the day to day raising of the children. They're
Mm,
there to do two things: to give unbounded love to the children, and secondly, to build the children, to complement the children. If a child draws a painting, It doesn't matter what the painting looks like. You should act like Picasso has just done a painting in front of you, right? G-
Yes.
gra- Grandparents are there to love their children to pieces and to build them, to compliment them, to grow their self-esteem. I, for one, call all children sweetheart. I've done that all my adult life. My boys are now in their 40s. They're the two of them. They're women. Their children. They're all children. I call sweetheart, and I say it like I
Mm,
mean it. Grandparents speak with a love voice. Parents
mm,
have to be stern sometimes. So grandparents are clever if they don't get involved in the stern discipline. Leave that to the parents. But just speak in a love voice. Let those children know that your grandparental love is without reserve and without judgment of any kind. It's just who they are. They're your people, they're your blood relatives, and you're going to love them no matter who they are. And that way, if they're successful in life, you can continue your love voice and the important role it plays in this unqualified acceptance, and you'll turn that onto their children someday. On the other hand, if things go wrong for your grandchildren, that same love voice will be more important than ever. I have a friend he's a very big time professor in Paris, France, where I spend some time uh, as an academic, and he had a grandchild uh, who decided to extort money from a neighbor and was caught and imprisoned. And he told me over lunch one day when I visited him how he never mentioned that. That was up to the parents to say, "How could you do this?" Whatever. He just continued loving his grandchild through his 3 years of imprisonment for this stupid act he did as a 24-year-old. And he said it
mm.
really paid off when that child, was freed from prison and got back in life. He was as warm as he could be, right through the rest of my this was a professor of mine, right through the rest of his life.
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting. Obviously, a very big impact has been made there and has been maintained even through such challenging times. That's really important. Yeah, I'm so glad that you shared that story because I feel like a lot of people can maybe relate or maybe take that on into their lives or into their grandparenthood. So, when people become grandparents, they might find it challenging or a big change, or maybe there are some difficulties with the parents. What do you think are the biggest challenges that grandparents might face?
Well, I think there are differences in feelings about what's safe for children to do, what's wise
Mm,
for them to do, what career they ought to take. All of these challenges, it's tempting as a grandparent because when your hair turns gray, you feel like you know a lot about the world, and you well might. But that doesn't mean you can force that on your grandchildren. Better to listen than to speak when you're a grandparent. Just give them love. It keeps you in better stead with the parents, and the grandchildren will appreciate the fact that you're not critically guiding them, but simply offering love and support and guaranteeing that there's another backup generation behind the parents. But we do, after all, live in a world where there's 50% and more of divorce. Um, Other kinds of tragedies occasionally take place: alcoholism, sudden job loss. Parents can get stressed out in the modern world. And having an unstressed grandparent uh, behind that, parents to turn to, unstressed in your grandparent grandchild relationship, is a, a great boon for a child to be able to turn to that grandparent and find the calm and soothing voice they knew when they were little.
yeah, absolutely. And I do want to touch on those, challenging situations that you mentioned that do occur in the modern world, of course, with your experience as a lawyer, of course. So, are there any legal considerations that families should be aware of regarding, the grandparents' rights or involvement in the family, especially when the family situation becomes complex?
Oh, very much so. I mean, there are custody issues, for example, in divorce. So, parents divorce. What are the rights of grandparents to have access to their grandchildren if the divorce is not a friendly divorce? If there's custody on one, what we call physical custody, let alone
Hmm.
legal custody, in one parent but not the other. What about the parents of the excluded parent who, let's take a simple example. That person was an alcoholic. The couple divorced. The judge thinks, no, the children need to be with, let's say, the wife who was not the alcoholic. That's what's safe. What about the parents of the alcoholic divorced father in this example? They still have legal rights to see those children. And it's important that see those children for all the reasons that I've already discussed. So, navigating the law, which of course I only know in the US, I don't know Australian law, but we're all from
Mm.
common law countries, so there's probably a lot of parallel. All of a sudden, you can be using the courts to try to gain access to your grandchildren, and that's a very challenging step.
So, finally, if you could give one piece of advice to grandparents about staying connected and valued in the family, what would that be?
That I think the piece of advice would be to recognize the importance of these lessons in loving that I've been talking about. Let me tell
Mm.
you about a quick experiment that was done years ago by two scientists, Nate Hubble and Wiesel. They won a Nobel Prize for this. Kitty cats are born with their eyes closed, right? So that what they did experimentally is anesthetize kittens, suture the eyes closed so they could control when they opened. Some they let open after a month, others 2 months, others 3 months, others 4 months. When they took kittens whose eyes had been closed for 4 months and they took the sutures out, so their eyes were normal, their optical nerve was normal, so they were looking at the world like you and I do, but they walked around the world as if they were blind. They would bump into walls because the brain had not been trained during kittenhood to interpret space, three dimensionality, for example. So even though their eyes worked, the visual cortex in their brain had never been educated. What parents and grandparents do when they hug and kiss their children and comfort them after they fall down and soothe them and calm them so they can fall asleep, they're building out the brain just the way the eyes of the kitten would have built out their visual part of their brain if they'd been allowed to be open. So it's really important to see the task of of being a grandparent is to help the parents in teaching the children about the incredible importance of loving, of making friends, finding love in the world, of eventually growing up and making a new generation. That's what humans had going for themselves, social life, making being able to rely on each other to build a safe circumstance. So that's the most important thing for parents to do. To help build out the child's assurance so that their self-esteem is is of a nature where they will go out and make friends. It starts when they're 3-year-olds. We push them towards a friend and we say, share your toys, share your toys. And you just keep doing that. And grandparents are a very important stepping stone in teaching children about how to form relationships. And that's what they'll need to get on in the world once they're grown.
So, we're now going to move to our break segment, which is questions from the internet. So, this is where I post some burning questions from people on the internet seeking advice, and maybe you can shed some light on their queries. So, the first person asks, I'm horrified by the idea of my daughter spending alone time with either set of her grandparents. How important are they really? Growing up, I didn't have a close relationship with my grandparents, and because of that, I've never really held much stock in grandparents. However, my husband had a very different experience where he had bedrooms at his grandparents' houses and would sleep over every week. We agreed that I wouldn't be comfortable with our parents being as heavily involved with our own kids, but would the child suffer from not seeing enough of their grandparents? What do you think about that scenario?
Well, children are very versatile, and after all, they're children growing up in war zones and all sorts of extreme circumstances. So it's not a matter of life and death. But if possible, to include grandparents, it's much better because it's the root back to your lineage. And people who are rootless, or for example, adopted people, have a lot of tension and cortisol running through them, worrying about just who their families were and whether they're part of the tradition of the line. So,
Mm.
what to do if you have difficult grandparents? be strategic. For example, set up circumstances where you're all together and that are guaranteed winners. A campfire where you're all telling stories around it. A movie that you know is good for everybody to watch and talk about. See if you can set up some series of get-togethers for everybody where you monitor the grandparents you're not so trustworthy of. And on the other hand, you build a bank of memories for these children when they grow up. So they will have some fond memories of the grandparents having been included in the campfire or the whatever it may be your family likes to do.
So, this next person asks, I'm disappointed in how my parents aren't involved as grandparents. Is it worth speaking up about? My parents are more interested in their retirement life than being present and involved in my kids' lives. I always had a vision that they would act like my grandparents did. Is speaking up to them even worth the drama that may ensue? What do you think of that one?
Well, I think that whether you speak up to them or not is so dependent on the facts, on your capacity to communicate effectively with them.
Mm.
But that being said, I would again be strategic. Set up some meetings, 1, 2 events a year where you're that are guaranteed to be fun for everybody. Build a campfire and sit around it and tell stories, whatever, a
Mm.
wonderful movie, whatever, it doesn't matter, but just build some memory bank deposits for your child. And even if your parents are there being sort of neutral to the joy of it all, the associative nature of the human mind will give them credit for having been present at a joyous event.
Mm. Interesting. So, this last question from the internet is a short and sweet one, but maybe you don't have a short answer because it is quite involved, maybe. What changes when you become a grandparent?
What changes is that you move out of the role of parenting and into this role I've been talking about, where you're able to see and benefit from having grandchildren. It's a mutually beneficial relationship. You're growing older. You're now beginning to realize your own mortality. The fact that you leave children and grandchildren behind you is very soothing to you as you grow older. It's very stressful to have no lineage left behind you. There's a lot of research on that. So the grandparent benefits. And of course, the children benefit from this stepping stone that grandparents provide in emotional development from the early days of parents, for nursing, parental, for thousands of kissing and hugs and all that. Grandparents are the first step out, and so being able to help a child grow into their self-assurance, their self-esteem, their capacity to relate to others is such a reward for the child, and it's just about equally rewarding for the parent. And by the way, it's fun to note that the neurochemistry inside of our bodies works for both parties. When a grandparent or a parent holds, hugs, soothes, calms a child, both of their bodies produce neurochemicals like prolactin and oxytocin that soothe both of them, make both of them feel good, whether it's in the nursing stage or it's in this soothing stage later on. So there's a lot of neurochemistry that's very relieving of stress. If you don't have that, you have too much cortisol, you have a lot of immune issues, and so you inflammatory issues. So loving one's parents and friends too, but the act of loving is filling your body with healthy biochemistry and helping reduce the cortisol in your system. Makes you live longer.
Amazing. That's an amazing fact on the end there. So now I'm going to move to our practices and habits section where I just want to ask you, is there a habit that you'd recommend grandparents practicing to build and maintain those strong relationships with their grandchildren and with their children maybe as well?
As I say, turn on the love voice.
Mm.
Be 100% positive. B I'll tell you a story. I had a very good friend for many, many years. We both enjoyed, golfing together, and,
Mhm.
when he'd answer the phone, he'd go, "Hello?" And I'd say, "Hey, Skip, it's Terry." And he'd go, "Hello." Okay? The love voice. It's soothing. It literally changes your biochemistry in your body, as I described earlier.
Yeah.
So use it. Be like that. It's better for you. It's better for those you relate to, and it's better for the relationships between you.
Mm. Do you think that anybody would find it challenging to do that?
Sure, absolutely. You might want
Yeah.
to talk to a therapist. You might want to talk to a woman. Women are so much better at these relationship tricks than men are. Lots of studies on that. There's a whole field of psychiatry called relational psychiatry that comes out of the difference. Women talk to each other about nonsense, but they also talk about deep feelings. When a woman says to another woman, "How do you feel?" She means it. Men do not say that. It's deviant, at least in US culture, for a
Yeah.
man to say to another man, "How do you feel?" He'll say, "Fine, period, next subject." You
Yeah.
cannot okay? So there's a lot to gain in from watching how women are able to talk honestly and trying for guys who are listening to the show, trying to say to a good friend, "Can I talk to you about something important? I mean, yeah, the sports team won last night. We've been through that. Now let me talk to you about how I feel. I've got some problems at home, or one of my kids, I'm really worried about them." Try it.
Mm.
It's good for
Yeah.
you.
That's really interesting. So I'm now going to move to our open mic segment. Now, this is your chance to talk about anything you're passionate about. It doesn't even have to be related to what we've discussed so far. So the floor is yours.
Well, I'm worried about the environment in this world. I have a wonderful son who is an environmental scientist at Yale, and the stories I get from him about how dangerously near we are to tipping points really, really worry me. Um, when I was growing up, I'm 80. When I was growing up, there were no issues, no concerns. Now we know a lot more about what we're doing to the environment, and it's so important that we all do what we can to press the authorities to really take it seriously. Because according to this environmental science son of mine and his colleagues, we're really at some tipping points. We need to get with this and do it right because all these kids and grandkids that we've been talking about are
Mm.
going to have some real troubles if we don't get this settled.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's really interesting. And I'm glad to hear that. Was it your son is doing such interesting and such important work? That's great to hear about. So I'm now going to have to conclude our episode. I am so glad to have interviewed you today, and I've definitely learned a lot. If our audience wants to find out some more about you and your work, where should they go?
Well, I have a website called thelonelynessbooks.com or my
Hmm.
name, J.W. Freiberg. That'll get you
Hmm.
there too. And there's lots of information on there about parenting, grandparenting, and about loneliness, about this epidemic of loneliness. The United States Surgeon General used that term. People
Mm.
are ever more alone, ever more disconnected from one another, ever less likely to have good, warm, and loving, successful relations with their family and their friends. People your age, for example, their time spent together in friendships in the Western world, all the different countries, has gone down about two-thirds in the last 30 years. So it's harder to make friends. It's harder to carry out significant times together with your friends. So I just want to say to everybody, mind your friendships. We all know you have to police your what you eat. There's a lot of food for sale, at least in American grocery stores, that you really ought not to eat. We all know this is a sedentary society where if you don't watch it, you're not going to get enough exercise. You police your food, you police your exercise, also police your connectivity with others. Make sure you're calling your family, make sure you're calling your friends. Keep those connections alive because as human beings, they're critical for our health and for our longevity.
Yeah. That's fantastic advice. And it's so interesting to me that, like you're saying, time spent together in friendships has gone down about two-thirds. And yet we have all the technology these days to connect with our friends more than ever and just give them a call. It's so simple. So thank you for sharing that. That's really interesting. And I hope that everyone will go and look at your website and find out more about what we've been talking about today and all the other interesting work that you do as well. So, we are going to conclude our episode now, unfortunately. Thank you so much, Terry, for joining us. I've learned a lot from you, and I hope our audience has too. And to our audience, we will catch you in the next episode.
Bye bye. Thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you.
You've been listening to All Together, the Family Science Insights podcast, produced by the Family Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so that we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at fa.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Dina Sargent. Thanks for tuning in.